Welcome to Bird Burger. In wildlife photography, we often find ourselves accumulating pounds of gear to the dismay of our finances. It's easy to feel like we need to spend money on all of the newest cameras and all of the useful accessories, but does it ever become too much? And if you're on a budget, what are the best pieces of gear that you can purchase? Today, I have the honor of speaking with Duade Paton, who is a fantastic wildlife photography YouTuber out of Australia and has tons of experience just across different brands and budgets. And so I'm excited to talk with you today. How are you doing?
Yeah, great. No, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on the podcast. It's nice and early over here. It's just gone 8 a.m. So Saturday, so a day ahead of you. But no, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on today. You have a ton of experience with all sorts of different camera bodies and gear, lenses, accessories. I'm confused sometimes on which ones you actually own just because I feel like you just review so many and you get your hands on so many, which is a really cool, really awesome thing. Sounds like you just have a plethora of experience across a lot of different just types of gear and stuff like that. I'm excited to get your input. What's your opinion on how much gear shapes a wildlife photographer? Do you think it kind of defines the style of who they are as a wildlife photographer, or do you think that those two things are kind of separate and remote from each other?
A couple of good questions there. Thank you. Yeah, I have used a bit of gear, not as much Nikon as you call it. So I've used a lot of Canon, so I've always shot Canon. So I sort of got the 40D. I've actually still got that. So this is the little 40D that was my very first camera, and I still have that. And I've sort of just progressed through Canon over the years, and I currently use the Canon R5 as my main stills body, and I use a Canon 500 f4 and the 100 to 500. So that's my main shooting kit. But I have had the pleasure and of using Sony, and used the Sony A1 and the 200 to 600, and I have used a few Nikon bodies, a bit of Tamron gear, etc., Sigma. So I've definitely used quite a bit, and it is interesting how that gear does shape your photography. You just mentioned, does the gear impact how you take the shots? And it does to a degree. I think the focal length is going to impact the types of shots that you take. So I've predominantly used prime lenses, and those prime lenses have sort of dictated how, the field of view, the depth of field, and traditionally I've sort of gone for a bird with an out of focus background, and that sort of shaped the style I was going in. However, I've recently got a zoom lens. I've never really had a proper good zoom lens, and I don't know why I never got one, but I just haven't. But I was very fortunate to get the RF 100 to 500, and that's like just opened up this whole other style of photography to me, a lot wider. You can get different types of shots. It's easy to carry around and move around, and that's been really exciting. So I think the lens can influence how you take shots. But in saying that, you can have two photographers with the same gear in the same location, and they'll come away with very different photos. I don't know if you've experienced that, but I have definitely experienced that. I had a mentor called Matthew Jones when I started, and he had a creative eye. He could see things I couldn't see, and we'd go out for these sessions, and we'd be having a coffee afterwards, catching up, and he'd show me some of his photos, and I'm going, I didn't see that. I didn't see that, but he saw it. So I think you do have to, be aware of what's going on, and over time your style will change and you gravitate towards what you like, and that's really cool. And I think that's one thing that makes our hobby so amazing, is that we can all do different things and just do what you like. So that's sort of how I go with gear, I suppose, and how it influences the shots that you take.
Yeah, so many different, it's amazing how many different styles and how many different types of shots can come out of same exact scenarios. And I've noticed in your wildlife photography, undoubtedly, you have a very clean aesthetic, I would describe it, in a lot of them, very isolated, and that's a lot of what you go for, and I can see that. And I feel like it makes sense when you talk about using prime lenses. It makes sense that that's what you use, that's what you shoot with, because your style of photography really focuses around that. And so that's cool to see. Whereas, like, for example, I shoot mostly on a Sigma 150 to 600, largely because in video, I like to have that kind of that range of zooming in and out. Even in photography, sometimes I find myself trying to back out a little bit and see how I can get this a little bit wider, a little bit more landscape, which is something I wouldn't have done if I had a prime lens, right? So very interesting.
Yeah, you'll be surprised at what a difference it makes as well. So I had the opportunity to shoot with my good mate Jan. He had the Canon 100 to 500, and I had the Sony 200 to 600. And the difference between 100 and 200 is significant. And we were photographing a family of geese, and he could get the entire family, the background, the mountains, this beautiful scene. But at 200, I just couldn't do it. And as I moved back, the perspective changed, and I just couldn't get the shot. So it was interesting to see that at 100 mil, he got the shot and I didn't at 200. So, you know, it's interesting.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah. I feel like, so we're talking about gear. I feel like there's a constant pressure to kind of purchase new gear in wildlife photography. It's just kind of a never ending pressure that a lot of us feel. When do you think it's worth it to upgrade your gear, and how do you judge what gear, or when it's worth upgrading that gear, what gear is worth upgrading to for you?
I agree 100% with what you're saying, and I'm probably guilty, to be honest. I'm probably one of the reasons people want to buy gear, and you know, it's just part of being on YouTube, I suppose. However, it's multifaceted, the answer, I think. Ultimately, it comes down to your finances and what you can afford. Do you know what I mean? And I think it's the key to understand all of this is the gear isn't necessarily going to improve your photos straight away. So you can have the best gear and you can still take really bad photos. And you could have affordable gear and take really nice photos. So that's just something we need to get out of the way, is good gear doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get good photos. True. And what, for me, I can only share my personal experience, is that I started with the 40D and I had a 70 to 200 non-IS, so fairly basic. I started taking photos of birds. I enjoyed it. I started to invest more time in it, and I thought, I'm really enjoying this hobby. I don't want to spend a lot of money, but I want a sharp lens that enables me to get the bird bigger in the frame. So I did a bit of research and I got the Canon 400 5.6, which I have here. I still have it, and I think this cost me $1,000, which is a lot of money back then. Yeah. And, but that lens then enabled me to start taking the photos that I wanted. So with that kit, I used that, I think I got a 7D. I used that for like 2 or 3 years, and I didn't upgrade my kit. I just spent hours and hours and hours in the field improving my skills, improving my technique, and just enjoying myself. And of course, I saw Jan with his 600, and I saw others with their big prime lenses, and I had gear envy, and I managed to even use a 500, and you know, I desperately wanted it, but I just couldn't justify the cost at that time, because this is just purely a hobby, and I'm sure for many people it is just a hobby. Yeah. So how do you then make the leap to investing in this expensive gear, and is it worth it? For me, after about 3 years spending every weekend taking photos, I knew it would be a good investment because the amount of hours I was putting into it. So I saved as much money as I could, and I actually ended up getting a second-hand 500 f4 version 2. And I got that about 6 or 7 years ago, and I think I paid $7,000 for it, which is a lot of money. However, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't gamble, I don't have a fancy car, I don't have any of these other things. So for me, it was a worthwhile investment, and getting that 500's been brilliant. And so I think it comes down to, if you're spending a lot of time in the hobby, you have the disposable income, then that's probably the time to upgrade. Just be aware that it's diminishing returns when you start upgrading. So, for example, you can get the 800mm RF f11, so for about $1,000 US, I think. So it's 800mm, and you know, it's okay. It's a pretty good lens for $1,000. But if you get an 800 5.6, the new one from Canon, I forget what it is. It's like over $20,000 here in Australia. Yeah. It's really, really expensive. Is it 20 times better than this lens? No, it's definitely not 20 times better. And the same thing goes for your kits. You could get a 7D and the 400 5.6 for say $1,000 used, or you could get an R3 and a 600 f4 for 20, 30,000. But if you were shooting a nice light with tame birds, you'd struggle to tell the difference. You probably could, but it wouldn't be astronomically different. Do you get what I mean? It's like the expensive good gear allows you to take shots in poor conditions and in scenarios where the less affordable gear is good. So the AF is going to be better, so you're going to get more keepers. The ISO performance is going to be better, so you can shoot in low light. It's going to be faster. Do you know what I mean? There's just little incremental things. But I know I've gone on a lot there, but it just comes down to your budget and what you're going to get out of it, I suppose, and just put the time in. It's all about putting in the time. If you put in the time, you'll get the best out of whatever gear you have.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, something that someone named Watts Wildlife on YouTube, Evan Watts, he was talking in a different podcast we had in the past, and he was talking about he felt like the time to upgrade your gear is when you understand your gear so well that you know why you would upgrade to the next piece of equipment, right? Which is kind of what I hear in a way, just a slightly different version of what you're saying, right? Where you're talking about like that gear is not going to change who you are as a wildlife photographer. It's not going to give you the shot, but it can enhance that shot. But if you don't know what it is that you're gaining out of the new piece of equipment or what it's going to enable you to do, it might not be worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question I often ask when people ask me about lenses, I'll say, "What is your current kit not doing well for you? Like, what is your current kit not doing? Like, what aren't you able to do? Can you not get close? Is it low light? What's the issue you're having with your good kit, with your current kit, or is it taking good photos already?" So ask yourself that question, what am I struggling with, I suppose, and can the gear help overcome that?
Yep. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, let's talk about camera bodies for a bit. Out of all the cameras, so you've used a lot of different camera bodies. What camera bodies that you've used kind of stand out to you, maybe as your favorite, and why would that be?
Yep, there's probably a few. I think I'll start at the very top. The Sony A1 was incredible. So the Sony autofocus, the frames per second, the clean files. It's just a beautiful camera. I'm not sold on the ergonomics of it and perhaps the menu because I'm just not used to Sony, but that camera has definitely paved the way for all the other brands coming through. The Canon R3 just feels so good in the hand, and that is sort of that's the body that I want. However, the 24 megapixels lets it down. So if they release the R1 and the R3 body, I'll be very, very happy. Obviously, the Nikon Z9 is very good. So all those top bodies are good, but they're very, very expensive. In terms of the more affordable cameras, if we go to like DSLRs, I think the Nikon have always led the way. The D850, the D500, those cameras are probably the best DSLRs that you're going to get. In terms of bang for buck sort of cameras, I think the 7D series was very good and very affordable by Canon, and that's what I used for a long time, and even some of the older Nikon bodies, the D7200s, etc. So, but for me, I mean, in terms of using cameras and then picking one up and going, oh wow, this is a big jump in performance, was when I got the R5, so a very expensive camera. But when I went from the 5D4, the Canon DSLR 5D4 to the Canon R5, the difference is just crazy. And it was just, I would never go back. So the R5, I think, was a big hit by Canon. It's got a few issues, but it's just a beautiful camera, and it was a big jump. But I honestly think nearly any modern camera will enable you to take really good shots. And I'm excited that, Olympus, that Fuji, that all these brands are putting heat on the big players, and we're sort of spoilt for choice as consumers. I think we are in probably the best time for wildlife photography and the cameras that are coming out. So I'm very excited.
So now that we've talked about camera bodies a little bit, let's ask the same kind of question about lenses. In terms of lenses, what do you think are maybe some of the best lenses available out there, or best lenses in terms of bang for buck, money's worth, stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a hard one to answer. So I think I'll start at the bottom, let's say the budget lenses and the lenses that I've used and which ones I think are really, really good value. And to begin with, it's the lens that you're using, so good choice. It's the Sigma 150 to 600 Contemporary. I think when I tested that, I was just blown away. I'd always heard rumors that these Sigma third-party lenses weren't that good, but I was able to obtain some really, really nice shots with that lens. And to get 600 millimeters at the price point, you're going to struggle to get 600 at any other way. And that 600 millimeters just makes the bird bigger. 6.3, your focus of the background's going to go out. So that's a really beautiful lens, and it's got versatility. It does have some AF issues that I've encountered. However, for the price, I don't think it can be beaten.
Yeah.
In terms of other lenses in that sort of price bracket, is the one that I've already mentioned, is the 400 5.6. When I bought this lens, my whole world changed. Honestly, I just could not believe it. It was so sharp, it was so light, and it just got me so into bird photography, and I still have it, and I still use it from time to time. It does lack IS and has a few other little issues, but for its price, wonderful lens. I think the Nikon 300 f4 is another really, really good sort of budget prime lens, and there's a few other ones. So once we look at those budget lenses, we then sort of go up to the mid-range sort of lenses. And there's one lens that just stands out above all others, and that's the Sony 200-600. When I used that lens, I honestly thought that they had mispriced it. Like, it's that good, it shouldn't be $2,000. It should be like $6,000, $8,000. The IQ of that lens. And I've chatted to my mate Jan about it. We wonder whether Sony's purposely priced it that way, obviously to get people into the Sony system. But regardless, if you have Sony, I highly suggest you get that lens. It's that good. I wish we had it for Canon. If we had it for Canon, I'd be buying it. And I noticed that, and Nikon are about to release, I think, their own 200-600 because they sort of know that range is so popular with people. So I look forward to seeing what Nikon do. I think Sigma now have the sport lens, which I think is the one that you use, which is a step up from the contemporary. The Canon have their 100-400 version 2, a beautiful lens, but 400mm is just a little bit short on a full frame. It's fine on APS-C, but on full frame it's a little bit short. So there's a few in that mid-range. I think Fuji's just come out with a 150-600. I mean, Tamron have their 150-600. So there's a lot of good lenses in that sort of mid-level price bracket. But you may have noticed that for whatever reason, we go budget, mid-level, and then we go astronomical prices, like car level prices. There's this massive jump. There doesn't seem to be a midpoint there between the sort of mid-level and the really high stuff. I'm not sure why that is. I can only assume that they're trying to protect those really good lenses. They're almost forcing you to buy the really expensive stuff. Nikon have kind of bucked that trend. They've come out with the 500 5.6, which is a fantastic lens, and they're even their 800. Yeah, it's incredible how the size of that lens, and the 800 6.3, which is just coming out. All credit to Nikon for what they're doing. I'm complimentary of them. Their lenses are good. Canon have sort of gone the other way. I'm not sure why they released that new 800 and 1200. They just seem so expensive for what they are. So lots of lenses, and there's lots of variety there. Again, I don't think there's one lens that does everything. Sigma tried with their 300-800, but it's so heavy and just so big. So I think the best way to go is to have a zoom and a prime. Honestly, I think you can't go without a zoom. I don't know why I didn't have one for so long, and that's what. Hold on a second. This cat. Yeah, so there's no one lens, and I think you really do need a zoom, and having a prime is great as well. So just having those two things. So that's what I'm going for. I think try and get a lens over 300mm. Try and have a zoom, and if you can afford it, get it in a prime as well.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely at a place in life personally where it's like I'm young, early on in marriage. Like we don't have our first house yet, stuff like that. So when I'm looking at a lot of those more expensive ones, I'm like, man, I wish I could have that. But at the same time, I'm like, I could save up for a mortgage on our house someday, or I can get this lens. So yeah, definitely, it's weird, that gap that goes on there. And I like what you said about how Nikon had been developing. They've been releasing some lenses recently that are kind of in that middle gap. They're still there's still a pretty big jump from that mid-tier range, but they're not like drastic. It's not half a car price, right, like we talked about. And so I like how they're doing that, because it's offering kind of this middle ground that no one else is filling right now. And so I do like that a lot. And I can vouch for what you were talking about. Sigma 150-600 contemporary, use that for I think I used that as my main lens for 2 years, and I was amazed at that price point, what you can get in the US. I know you can get it for like $900, and if you just stop that up one stop to 7.1 away from the 6.3, at least for me, I found it was just incredibly sharp, and so very impressive. And that's a good, you just gave a really good, nice, complete summary of all the lenses. So I love that. You also, something that I like about your stuff, that you kind of look into teleconverters a little bit and extenders. Teleconverters are a very kind of political topic, for lack of a better word, in wildlife photography, where I feel like people are either very strongly for them because they save you money and they're a much more affordable alternative, cheaper option, or people are like very against them because they're like, they don't work at all, like they're total ripoff, whatever. I'm curious, in your opinion, have you found them to be kind of a waste of money, or have you found them to be a pretty good investment?
The quick answer is both. I've wasted money on them and they've been a good investment. So how about I start at the beginning and explain why they're not a good idea and also why they are a good idea.
I love it.
So when I started, I got the 70-200, as I mentioned, the version 1, so a very old lens, and I only had 200, and as everyone knows, when you start photographing birds, you need more focal length. And you think, well, the easiest way to get more focal length is just to get a converter. It's going to double my focal length. Amazing. So I ordered the Canon 2x version 2, I think it was. I've whacked that on my 70-200. I now had a 400mm lens and I thought it was going to be great. I took some photos and then I'm looking at them going, uh-oh, is there something wrong with this converter? Because the photos were soft, the focus was sort of off, and I just couldn't get any decent shots. And it soon dawned on me, I think I spoke to someone said, what did you waste your money on that for? You shouldn't have done that. And I thought, oh, okay. So it was a costly mistake to make, and I ended up selling it. And that's when I got the 400 5.6. And the difference, you can't even, it's so incredible, the difference between the 400 5.6 and what I was using with the 2x. So it dawned on me that you can't really use converters on old lenses or slow lenses. If you try and use 2x on, say, a kit lens or any lens that doesn't have very good glass, it's just not worth it. And I was even surprised. I had a good friend that had a 300 2.8, I think the version 1, one of the older 300, but still a big lens, and he had an old 2x, and he let me use it, and I was so excited. Like, when you're just starting out and somebody lets you use expensive gear, I was expecting, I don't know, the cedar part or something. I was expecting this amazing lens, and I was so excited. I put my camera on it, and I've laid down. Oh yeah, I was just expecting this, amazing shots. This is it. This is what I've always wanted. And I put my camera on, I've laid down, and I've hit the shut. I've tried to focus, and this lens has gone, and I was going, uh-oh, there's something wrong with this lens. I haven't broken this person's lens. The autofocus was shocking. It was so slow. It was just almost unusable. And I said, is this how it's supposed to focus? And he went, yeah. And I went, there's no way I'm using that, because my 400 was just so much faster.
Yeah.
And I sort of swore off using converters after that, because I thought, oh, there's no way, this is just too slow. So I didn't really buy any converters or use them. But then I got my 500 f4, and that is a beautiful lens. It's at f4, so it's very fast. And I had another friend who had a converter, and so I thought, I'll try the 1.4 version 3, so the latest converter from Canon. I've put it on there, and I've gone, oh wow, the autofocus is fast, the images are good. I've now got 700mm. And since I've bought the 1.4, it's almost welded onto that lens. I use it that often. It's like 95% of the time, I just don't take it off. So 700mm is my sweet spot for focal length. And yeah, I don't notice any degradation, and I use it all the time. I have used the 2x on that, and that gives you 1000 f8, and it's okay, but I prefer not to use the 2x if I can get away with it. And just of interest, if you use a DSLR and you put a converter on it, it's going to make it a 1 stop slower, 1.4, 2 stops with a 2x. So say this 400 5.6, if I put a 1.4 on this, it goes from 5.6 to f8. Now, because you're at f8, older DSLRs wouldn't even autofocus. The newer ones would give you a single autofocus point just in the middle, which makes it hard because you can't move the focus point around. The latest ones gave you a few more focus points, but it was just a pain to use, to be honest. And so generally I didn't use converters on those lenses on a DSLR. However, when I got the R5, I wanted to see how the converters went on the mirrorless body, and I was really surprised. I was actually shocked at how well the converters worked on a mirrorless body. Because the mirrorless bodies have a different autofocus system, you're less likely to get these calibration issues that you might get on the DSLR with front focus and rear focus. The autofocus is working off the sensor, so it's generally always right. So the images just seem to be sharper. And even at f8, you might get a smaller focus box sometimes, but the autofocus still worked. The eye tracking worked. I was still getting nice shots. So I will use converters far more on the mirrorless than I did on a DSLR. So, and it all depends on, again, it all depends on the light again, because it is going to slow down your lens. I'm very fortunate, and I take it for granted sometimes, that I live in Australia. We have a lot of sunlight, therefore low light isn't as much of an issue for me. At the moment though, we're in winter and it's been snowing up in the mountain, it's very cold, but generally we get a lot of light, so that's not an issue. So my final answer is, I use them. I use them on my 500, I've used it on the 100 to 500, I've used it on the Sony 200 to 600. So I use them because you have to remember the focal length is changing when we use a converter. So I have 700 millimeters. Whereas if I crop it, I've actually got a much smaller file. However, as you might have seen in one of my videos, it's not as much of an issue on the R5 because I've got 45 megapixels. So I can crop this pretty heavy and it's still okay. However, if I'm using the R6 and I want to crop heavily, I'm going to end up with a tiny file. However, if I use a converter, I'm not going to have to crop as much. So it does come down to the megapixels as well. So that was a really long answer. I hope that kind of helps people, I suppose, to try and make that decision for them.
Yeah, no, that's some really good pieces of advice. I think that what you're talking about, everything from focusing, working different based on compatibility between, just how advanced it can all work together. Megapixel count is a huge thing to keep in mind. And then, just like glass quality in the first place, because if it's already on the lower end, maybe you don't want to, pull that too much slower. So those are some great things they're able to share. And I love a lot of the videos. Make sure you go check out some of his videos. I'll list maybe one or two in the description below where you kind of show those comparisons, because I think those are really interesting and not a lot of people do them on YouTube, at least. So I've really appreciated watching those. So I guess moving on from wildlife photography, teleconverters, lenses, camera bodies, the core of what we use. We also use accessories a lot as wildlife photographers, right? It's a huge part of our arsenal. And I know for me personally that there's a lot of wildlife photography accessories that I feel like are almost essentials to me sometimes in certain situations that I'm out in, or even just in general, can enhance the quality of my experience, or how much pleasure I find in the activity while I'm out and about shooting. So personally, I feel like, for example, I can't go anywhere now without like my photography gloves, just because the way that it feels and it grips my camera, so much better than my hands, or a gimbal head on a tripod, or if I'm shooting down low now, a skimmer ground pod, or whatever it may be. What are some maybe essential wildlife photography accessories that you've come across, in your opinion?
The one that you mentioned, the ground pod, that was an absolute game changer. It's so expensive for what it is. And I did do a video on those ground pods. If people aren't aware, it's just something that you can put your gimbal on to get you nice and low. So when we shoot water birds, shorebirds, the angle is much better if we get low to the ground, and the ground pod allows you to do that. When I didn't want to pay that money to start with, and I actually built my own. I started with a frying pan, and I just put a block and put the camera on the frying pan and moved that around. I think I used Tupperware for a while, but they were just breaking and they just weren't up to what I needed, and I ended up just paying the money for the ground pod. But the other thing I like is my throw blind. You might have seen it in a few of my videos. It's like a camo hide, bag hide they call it, from Naturescapes in the US. Again, slightly expensive for what it is, but for those times where you want to disguise yourself and you might have flighty birds, maybe you're at a watering hole or whatever, that's really, really handy. You can just throw it over and it's got a little window you can look through. So that's really handy. I love my boots. You've probably seen them in my videos. I've got some great muck boots that I got given as a gift, and I wear them everywhere. And those boots are fantastic, so I don't need to worry about a little bit of snake protection. I don't need to worry about mud, water, or anything like that. So my boots are really cool. Camera bags, obviously important, and that's handy. Memory cards, extra batteries, all those sort of things are very, very helpful as well. So there's definitely quite a few things that I use, but yeah, the ground pod by far was my biggest asset, I suppose, when I was starting out.
Yeah, I love a lot of those things you were sharing. For me, like what you were saying, the ground pod, super essential now. It's definitely a part of my arsenal and will be for a long time to come. I was amazed after getting to use it on a whole day. On the latest video that I released on my main channel, I got to use it for a whole day photographing shorebirds on the beach, and it was just irreplaceable after using it. I'm like, yeah, there's no way I'm going back anymore. And even, you can use a frying pan, like you said, make something of it, if you're handy and stuff like that. But even compared to that, I like how light it is. I mean, the ground pod is incredibly sturdy and durable while still being very light, right? So yeah, you can get almost the same thing, and it's not like you can't make do with that by any means. But I did like kind of how light it was as well, and just how well it worked out. But yeah, it was pretty cool. And yeah, if anyone's interested in getting it on my main channel, still have a 10% off from that sponsored link that was, a part of the video in that one. So make sure you go check that out as well if you want it. But yeah, skimmer ground pod, amazing piece of equipment, as well as, I like using blinds as well. I haven't used the type of blind that I see you using a lot, like you were talking about that throw blind, but blinds can be super helpful. Obviously, you said backpack, a bunch of stuff like that. So those are all great things to keep in mind. So we've talked about some that you really liked and you enjoyed, right? What are some accessories that you found that you maybe actually kind of wasted some money on, maybe shouldn't have gotten, stuff like that?
Yeah, there's a couple that spring to mind. The first one was a UV filter. I don't know why I bought that or had that at the start. I think you might, you read
it's a common one.
You should protect your lens. And ultimately, though, you've got a very expensive bit of glass. You probably shouldn't be putting a cheaper bit of glass in front of that. So I would definitely advise if you're using one, the UV filter, take it off. It will often interfere with the quality of your gear. So I wouldn't be using a UV filter. The second thing which I had bought, which was a waste, was a flash, to be honest. So I bought the better beamer, the better beamer that goes on your camera, the big Canon flash. I just don't use flash. So I know a lot of people do, and that's great. But for my style, I just couldn't be bothered faffing around with the flash, and it was just more of a pain than anything. So I just often stayed in my camera bag, and now it doesn't even go in my camera bag. So the flash definitely wasn't a very good investment for me. It definitely helps sometimes, but I just prefer to shoot without flash. So that was probably the worst investment I made.
Yeah. Most definitely. Yeah. Doing flash is it's a whole nother ball game, and it's a whole nother thought process that you have to go through. And like you said, not that it's bad, people who can pull it off well, can do amazing things with it. Like I brought a guy, I don't know if you know who Greg Basco is, amazing wildlife photographer. Yeah, he uses flash all the time, does it amazingly, but it's a lot of work. And listening to that process, I'm like, man, wildlife photography already feels like it's so hard to control what's going on, and you're so reactionary that using that flash is just something that most people don't wind up wanting to do. But yeah, it's
an amazing creative tool. It's a really, really good creative tool that you can use the different light sources. Again, like you said, I just haven't put the time into it. It all comes down to time. Because I haven't had a lot of success, I just haven't put the time in. But if you put the time in, you'll be much better, like anything.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, those are some great thoughts. Thanks for sharing all that you did. You shared some really valuable and just good stuff all across the board. So I appreciate you sharing everything. Is there any cool projects that you're working on right now on your channel, or anything else beyond that that you'd like to share about?
I'm really looking forward to the Canon R7 coming out. There seems to be a lot of thoughts on that. I know you did a video, and plenty of other people have done a video on that, so I can't wait to actually get my hands on it and actually start testing it. And again, I'm fingers crossed at the end of this month. I haven't been given any sort of confirmation by Canon or anything. I put a pre-order in like a lot of other people. We don't have special access, unfortunately. So once I get that camera, I'm just going to try to test it the best I can in terms of the ISO performance, the buffer, the Sigma 150 to 600, the cheaper 100 to 400. So that's probably going to take up a fair bit of time, I think, coming up, is just putting that camera through its paces. And I would love to test the Fuji. If there's anyone with contacts to Fuji, I want to try their new camera and their new lens. That's what I'd love to do at some point. But that's sort of what I'm looking at doing. So just continuing with YouTube, I suppose, and just having fun while I'm doing it.
Yep, most definitely. You have some great stuff. So yeah, thanks again for coming on. If you guys are interested in checking out a lot of stuff on gear or any other types of things to know about wildlife photography, Duade Paton is a great guy to check out on YouTube. So check out his link below. And if you aren't subscribed to Bird Burger already, make sure you subscribe to Bird Burger as well. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next time.